Tabletop games are all about relationships. Sure, we go about pummeling monsters and enemies and work together to tell a collaborative story, but it's the ways in which our characters interact with each other and the world all around them that makes these games personal. And, seeing how we are in the month of love, I want to take a moment to explore a product that leaps right into ways to deepen our character relationships. Metal Weave Games' recent release, How to GM Romance. Really quick, I want to make it clear that this review is in no way sponsored. My PDF copy of this product came into my possession because I backed this project on BackerKit. There have been 2 interactions between me and the folks behind this book. Me posting where I said I was looking forward to digging into it more, and a second musing about making this a possible future review. So rest assured that I'm expressing only my thoughts and opinions alone, and that they are in no way influenced by outside forces. And now, we can jump into the heart, pun intended, of How to GM Romance. How to GM Romance has a staggering 155 pages of information. The bulk of this is focused on developing systems that can be incorporated into nearly any tabletop RPG. They run the gamut of intimacy levels, from tracking how favorably characters view each other to running a date between them, and all the way to, well, all the way. And then, to top off all of that, Metal Weave has included several advice essays that cover multiple topics to help GMs tackle different elements, such as how to approach this from the perspective of an asexual, to how to be more inclusive of other viewpoints, and even how to depict sex work in a humane and respectful way. Not only that, but this book also contains vibrant, beautiful human-made art. The colors literally pop off the page, with the art throughout accentuating the written material while evoking even more ideas about the possibilities. It's tastefully done, and inclusive of multiple cultures and lifestyles. Let's address the dragon in the room here. Not every table is going to want to include romance in their games. They don't want character relationships to go that direction, and that is perfectly fine. However, I would pose a counterpoint. What if the concepts within these pages are still capable of making a game flow even better? With that in mind, stick around. There may yet be something here that you may find useful. For everyone else who wants to dabble in the romance pool, whether it's in the shallow end or the deepest section imaginable, you're likely desperate for me to leap right into the material, so let's go. Let's get this out of the way. No, not every table believes that they need safety tools. Perhaps they've been playing in the same game for decades, maybe no one has ever raised an issue with something that happened in game before. Fine. That said, in a game where player agency is a core tenet and where the GM has considerable power to shape the experience for everyone at the table, you should incorporate safety tools to some extent. Nowadays, strangers are playing together online and they may not know that someone has a phobia or a strict PG rating for content that they participate in. Does it hurt to give transparency and ways to mitigate situations that come up from this? No. They are merely another tool to ensure the game remains fun for everyone. Me personally, I've never had someone use a safety tool like an X card or any other such element in the course of my games. However, I do make sure that all of my players know that they are available, no questions asked. I also provide content warnings and make sure to get anonymous buy-in from each player before the campaign begins, and then I follow up throughout to ensure nothing detracts from their experience. Why is this important? Because safety tools become even more integral when you introduce deeper inter-character relationships. How the GM Romance covers these in almost painstaking detail. Each system reinforces how to emphasize safety at all times during the game when using these tools, along with examples of how using these tools work in practice. The details for how safety fits into the system are very thorough and well thought out. If I do have a criticism, however, it would be that the information is perhaps too spread out. If I'm having a discussion with my players about the romance tracking system, for example, I would normally also like to know the safety tools that pertain to the disputes and fallout systems in case a relationship escalates to that level. This way, I could walk through the various pitfalls all at once rather than getting to that point and realizing that the player and I are not aligned due to elements of that system. This is more of a convenience factor for me, as I do understand that the safety tools conversation should always be ongoing and evolving. That said, I do think a centralized section devoted specifically towards safety would go a long ways to consolidating everything at the start and establishing a baseline for how a romance could evolve over time. Alright, we've gotten the basic business details addressed, so we can now leap into the heart of the matter, the various systems in this book. I'm not going to go super in-depth because, let's face it, if I did that you would need to buy the book. However, I will call out the things that I liked and the things that gave me pause as we go along. The foundation system upon which everything else is built is the romance tracking system. As the authors would describe it, and as I would agree, this is like how video games have the so-and-so approves or this person greatly disapproves pop up at key moments. It's an easy way to visualize this. However, unlike a video game where the developers have already created characters with everything already pre-programmed with their needs and their wants, it falls to the GM to develop their own. Enter the romance sheet. This form has everything you can possibly need to consider for a character, from likes, dislikes, deal breakers that would end a relationship with them, what insecurities they have, how to influence their approval, and so much more. Even if you're not intending to use this book as a guide for how to develop a romanceable NPC for a character, this form is still a fantastic resource. You can fill this out for any NPC, someone the party needs to convince to aid them, an enemy that perhaps the party wants to make more friendly, or just about any situation you can possibly think of. Because of that, this may indeed be a gold standard for creating nuanced NPCs, even without an intended romance. The only thing that I would really hesitate on for this is that there is, in some ways, too much information, and not quite enough clarity. For example, there's a full section devoted to an NPC's backstory, as well as their physical description. We have an idea what this means. But then How the GM Romance also mentions general description, which it specifies should be some key characteristics of this NPC. To my mind, this is asked and answered by the other two fields, but there's no real clear answer for what it means. And even more confusing is that looking at the romance sheet separately, there is no field for general description. Because of that, it makes me wonder whether it was planned for a mission or if it got missed on the final product. Either way, there are some elements that I would have liked a bit more explanation on, especially since this is where everything begins. The book also dives into how and when to utilize approval shifts, advice for how to express those changes in attitude, and general ways to roleplay these elements. Again, like I said before, in a non-romance game, this is still a viable system to utilize, and I was thinking that long before I came across a section on aromanticism that was included. That just goes to show that my interpretation aligns with those of the authors. The dispute and fallout system further expands the romance tracking system. It comes into play more when a character has negatively influenced an NPC in an interaction, and the system focuses on how that change alters the dynamic between the two. Essentially, while positive interactions would lead to dating, intimacy, and the Serenade systems, this system answers the question about what comes from a negative event. In some cases, you might expect that would lead immediately to a fight between two characters. However, the system is designed to let some grievances simmer as the story progresses. I don't know if I buy into this idea entirely, and here's why. Every character should be different. A strong-willed NPC may immediately act upon a negative interaction to make it into an immediate issue to resolve. Someone who shies away from conflict may just keep silent until there is too much emotional baggage for them to continue carrying. I agree that these should be noted on the approval sheet when they happen, and as they can always come up again in the future, but the nuance is something that I believe may be missed. Regardless of timing, eventually the grievances should lead to a fight, and then a point of no return, at which point the relationship either endures or collapses. And this again is where I hesitate. On the one hand, the breakdown of everything has a logical flow. You can see the problems that can build into mountains of issues. However, on the other hand, once a reclamation occurs and there is agreement from the characters to maintain a relationship, there is no advice on how to incorporate the past issues into the continued dynamic. It boils down to a single sentence mostly. When an NPC has more reclamations than unresolved feelings, the GM might decide to trigger a new relationship if both parties desire it. And that is the final word at the end of the chapter. There is no more about utilizing the past issues in the future. It really just starts to fall on the GM then to interpret how this would look in future interactions. A good game master, they can make that work. But a new one may desire more advice and structure than that. Just something that missed the mark a little bit to my eye. While the dispute and fallout system has no set place in the relationship, aside from fitting in wherever thematically relevant, the dating system is the next step for the characters' relationships. It's designed to take characters from the first sparks of attraction to dating and then beyond. A lot of this section is really beneficial and a great resource for interactions in general. The focus shifts to open-ended questions and more digging up insights into how a character is feeling, something that GMs should do more often to help develop the player characters. To that end, there's a focus on several moments, or scenes if you will, that the dating system calls out, from the initial invite to preparation to the actual date, just going separate ways, and then afterwards, the lasting impressions that remain. There are great insights to be had here in the character development, but depending on how the NPC's approval shifts over the next several dates, perhaps they begin going exclusive or start to drift apart. The downside of this is that the spotlight generally falls on one player during this system. This can work, and clearly does since the authors of this book have run spicier games online and their players have had fantastic experiences with it. That said, newer GMs or tables that have less forgiving schedules may have a different track record with this system. There is a suggested workaround where the other players get to watch or meddle in the events, but the root of the matter is that this becomes less entire table collaborative and more one-on-one collaborative. The idea behind this system is well-intentioned, and it would definitely work with buy-in from everyone, but is a bit more challenging to recommend for most tables. I don't have as much to say about the Serenade system. The reason for that is because it's focused on building approval through gestures and gifts. Poetry, love letters, physical items. There are examples and details for each of these, along with recommendations on how to make them more meaningful to the characters, and players for that matter. In all truth, it is very Dragon Age-y with how gifts can make your companions like you more. Stepping away from the romance aspect, I would even say that the commissioning and crafting speed roll table would be useful in general for any time a character places an intricate request that needs to be made with a certain craftsman. The idea about how much a gift impacts an approval score can work in general, to a point. The examples of what gifts affect approval and how much feel a bit limited and arbitrary. So while this section is serviceable, I don't believe I would place as much emphasis on it. Yes, it offers a chance for something to be more personalized to drive the relationship forward, but the efficacy of the Serenade system hasn't really been sold to me yet. I would probably reference this a few times, but I would develop my own scores and ideas, especially if I could draw inspiration from the appendix relating to romantic gifts. Alright, so this is where things get spicy. The intimacy system has a longer intro here than the other sections, mainly because there's a lot more care needed to handle these interactions. The author of this section is acutely aware of this, advising at multiple instances to get feedback before and after and during a scene that seems to be escalating in this specific direction. But once you get past the safety tools, the topic suddenly turns to flirting? And I'm sure you're thinking, wait, shouldn't this be under the dating or serenade section? To a point, I do agree, and I can see this overlapping with those two systems. However, in the context of intimacy, flirting is more about showing interest in the other partner as a way to transition to the steamier material. I honestly am not 100% sold either on placing it under the intimacy system, as it does in my mind support the efforts in the earlier systems, but I can see the point that they make regarding intimacy being about interest rather than a coy word game passed back and forth. From flirting, the section transitions to the steamy stuff. And honestly, the advice provided is very good in general. Rather than be about a performative test that relies on a pass-fail mechanic, How to GM Romance suggests focusing on open-ended questions that build out the narrative around the event. Rather than having it be a decision arbitrated by random dice, it's collaborative and each part builds on the other to create something beautiful. I appreciate the intent behind this being made into more of a meaningful event that is more about a character's feelings and thoughts rather than the deed itself. That also further helps keep this a system-agnostic supplement that does not need to be restricted to dice-only games. That said, my concern from the dating system still applies here. The rest of the players at the table are kept out of the spotlight, and it makes it harder to keep them engaged. There is a great suggestion where the other players can be given the open-ended questions to ask, but it still feels like they are too removed from the game that they are attending. For some tables, doubtless, this can work. For most tables, however, I'm not certain that it would be a perfect fit. Alright, well, this review has already stretched on for an extensive amount of time, and I haven't even touched on the essays included. Suffice it to say, these resources are fantastic to add more context to many of the things that revolve around romance and sex and gaming. These are definitely worth reading on your own, not just to incorporate into your games, but also to broaden your understanding of concepts in life. But in terms of how to GM romance as a whole, where do I fall on it? There are many things I like, and I can appreciate the thought applied to articulating the concepts into tabletop games. Much of what I've read is solid and just generally good advice. That said, there are elements that I don't feel landed quite as well with me, and could make balancing a fun session for most players a bit challenging. Overall though, I would give this book an 8 out of 10. I was very impressed by the material included, and I found it insightful regarding various topics, including ones that are harder to have openly with those who are not extremely close to us. The details for character approval and interest I think is also perfect for incorporating into just about any situation, whether it is tabletop games or as a novelist. It definitely keeps attention focused on aspects that define an interesting character. Would I use this as a resource to run a game with romance? I'm not adverse to the idea, but I would likely keep the focus on the first two systems discussed. The reason for this is that I would want to keep all the players engaged together, rather than fracturing into some playing and others spectating. That said, I can see this book being a resource that would be useful for tables looking to get into that, and I would consider it to be a required reading before and during a campaign that involves romance. Anyways, thank you for opening your heart to this video and to my channel. Your viewership and interest means a lot, and, in case that's not clear, cheers.